Hello and welcome to our latest episode of Behavioural Science for Brands. Each week we look at how you can take findings from academia and apply them in business and marketing. And this week I'm very excited because I'm joined by Todd Rogers. He is Professor of Public Policy at Harvard and has written one fantastic book called Writing for Busy Readers. So hello, Todd.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, very, very good to see you. Very good to see you. So we often like to start the podcast by asking guests how they got into this field of behavioural science. So if you could tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and how you first became interested in the topic, that'd be brilliant.
Sure. I was a political pollster, which means I did survey research for campaigns and realized there was this science of behavior change not being used in politics. And so I decided I want to get my PhD basically in the science of behavior change. And I ended up getting my PhD at the Harvard Business School, joining psychology and covering economics to organizational behavior. And then I left academia and moved to Washington and started a research organization that is basically the hub of data and behavioral science for the left, for the Democrats and progressive groups. We ran Obama's experiments team, and basically we're working on how do we translate the methods and insights of behavioral science to political campaigns, persuasion, fundraising, get out the vote. How do we communicate to busy voters? And then I didn't want to do politics anymore, so I shifted back to academia, and now
when was that? So if that was Obama, was that what, 2008?
We ran his experiments team in 2012.
2012, yeah.
And so the organization Analyst Institute started in 2008. And there was, if you want to learn more about it, a book called The Victory Lab was written about it. And it's basically just the rise of data and behavioral science on, progressive causes in the US campaigns. But the big theme that we're going to pull the thread on is, at the time, stage 0 of communicating effectively political messages is getting through to busy voters who are busy, distracted, and not as interested as we are in the topics we want to talk about. Return to academia, shifted to, instead of communicating to busy voters, how do we communicate to busy families in schools? And started working with K-12 school districts to develop interventions to reduce things like absenteeism or increasing academic achievement for kids by communicating to busy families. In the process, spun a company out of my lab called Everyday Labs that now works with many of the largest districts around the United States and administers, something like 10 million interventions this year alone to reduce absenteeism using the best evidence we have, and continues to do these A/B tests, but communicating to busy families. And then over the last 7 years or so, started thinking about how do we work with leaders of organizations to communicate to their customers and their employees and their constituents who are all busy also. And so in the end, we're my collaborator, Jessica Lasky-Fink, and I are oh, wow, there are a small number of principles that are consistent across all of these domains. How do you write so busy people read, understand, and respond? And you could call, it starts with, we think as behavioral scientists, but ultimately stage 0 of everything is, do we get our message through? And so that was where the book came from, Writing for Busy Readers.
Fantastic. And is Jessica also at Harvard? Is that how you've paired up with her?
Yeah, she was a doctoral student at Berkeley, and then now she's at Harvard here at the Kennedy School of Government with me, but not in my lab. She now is the director of a lab called the People Lab, working on solving public personnel challenges using behavioral science.
Yeah, well, I thought it was an absolutely fantastic book. One of the experiments that I absolutely loved in the book was when you sent out emails to board governors, I think, trying to get them to fill in a survey. And there was essentially an A/B test. Sometimes the preamble to the survey was 120 or 130 words. Sometimes it was more like 50 or 60. Could you tell us a bit about the thinking behind that, the results and the results?
Yeah, we were interested at the time in doing a survey of school board members around the United States. And for those unfamiliar, schools are often in school districts, which then have governing boards. And the boards are either appointed or elected. But with another doctoral student, we scraped 7,000 email addresses of these elected or appointed school board members. And we wanted them to fill out our survey to find out what they were doing, what they were thinking. And so we wrote a first draft of this like very respectful and deferential message. Like, you're doing really important work and it's impacting lots of people's lives. Thank you for all you're doing. We know you're weighing competing interests. We appreciate the time and the devotion you have. Will you please fill out our survey? And then in the other condition, we just said, you're doing important work, balancing competing interests. Will you please complete our survey? And so we randomly assign the 7,000 school board members to the two different groups. But beforehand, we actually have a couple hundred people read both messages and predict which one will be more effective.
Yeah.
And this is a consistent theme, is that people think more is better. They think that, of course, being more respectful, more deferential, they predict that being more gracious and grateful will increase response rates. The problem is it's also much longer. It's about twice as long. And so we run the experiment. It turns out that cutting the words in half, despite people thinking the longer one will be more effective, the shorter one is twice as effective. And this is a pattern we see. We have never run an experiment and not found some version of that. That just one of the principles in the book is less is more. And it's just, in this case, it was doubled the response rates. If you're interested, you may remember the fundraising email experiment we ran in that same section that I think is also hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, I found the school governor one particularly interesting because you also had a hypothesis about like why this was happening. I think one of the things you discussed was if people saw a long email request, they assumed that the task itself was going to be laborious. They almost used the length of the message as a proxy for the effort required to fill in the survey, because how the hell do you know how long a survey is going to be? You have to use whatever evidence you have around you. So could you talk us through the findings there?
Yeah, I mean, you laid it out exactly. This is not universally going to be true because sometimes we just want people to read and understand what we're sending. And when it's a long wall of words, the challenge is they may just postpone reading it at all or just decide not to read it at all. And just being shorter makes it more likely people will engage in the first place. Then the second challenge is if they do engage, are they going to understand and complete it? And then the third is taking action. And in your case, what you're describing, like they do have this inference that the writer of this message clearly does not respect my time. And so the survey probably isn't going to either. That is what we ended up finding.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you'd surveyed people before and they were wrong in their expectations about which of the two messages would be most effective. Why do you think there's such a discrepancy between what people expect and then the reality? People have got lots of experience, they've received lots of messages. Why can't they put themselves in their own shoes and accurately predict the results?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't think there's a single answer, but the suite of answers are all going to be some version of not being very good at imagining what it's like to be on the other side. I am writing this. When I'm writing it, this is important to me. It's important enough that I am devoting time and attention to it. I kind of imagine maybe you will too. But the reality is you get it while at a red light with your kids yelling at you in the back seat, and you look at your phone for 12 seconds more than you were supposed to, which should be zero, and then you move on, right? So like people are living busy, distracted lives, and so my 3-paragraph appeal for you to answer a yes or no question just falls in like, well, I'll read it later, and later often becomes never.
Yes, yeah. So I think that point about struggling to extrapolate accurately, that if someone is deeply invested in a email, then they assume others are. This like almost like a kind of a false consensus effect. And I think that is certainly something that afflicts marketers. And if you work on a toilet roll brand or a margarine brand, you spend 40 hours plus a week thinking about this brand, and therefore you assume other people are going to do the same, and it ends up leading to completely inappropriate messaging. How do you think you shake people out of this misunderstanding?
I mean, this is one of the most surprising and probably most beneficial aspects of the book and the work that Jessica and I did. We do randomized control trials across all modes of communicating, from texting to email to ads to government forms to bureaucratic forms to reports. So we have lots of, like, across all modes. The TLDR of the whole thing, too long didn't read, is if you make it easy for readers, they're just going to be more likely to read, understand, and respond. And the surprising and I think really valuable part of our approach is that people come up after we teach this and they're like, oh my God, I have spent my entire career fighting with people about this. And they always dismiss what I'm saying as preference or taste or style. And what this research program, which we borrow, it's not just our work, we borrowed from dozens of other people's research. What this research program shows and consolidates is this pretty compelling causal evidence that it's not just a matter of taste. It's a matter of effectiveness, that our readers are skimming, and that using an approach where we make it easy for skimmers, we are more effective in achieving our goals. And those who read it end up saving time. So it's kinder for them.
You talked about skimmers there. So one of the tactics you've suggested that writers can do is simplify the message by reducing word length. Are there other tactics that mean a message will resonate better with skimmers?
Yeah, so the less is more is one of them, and it's one of our favorites, and it resonates for people. There are three components to that. There's fewer words, which is easy. Instead of saying in order to, you should just say to, right? Any additional words just makes it less likely someone will read, and if they do read, more likely they'll give up before they get through. But the other ones are fewer words, fewer ideas, and fewer requests. And this is where it's just judgment. There is not a right answer, but you just need to know the more you add, the less likely someone is to do any one thing that you ask or read any one component of what you wrote. And there's just trade-offs all the way down. That's one. Less is more. That's the other ones I'm happy to walk through if you a couple, if you'd like, or do you have any particular another one is designed for easy navigation. I love this one, which is, it's a little bit one level up from how we write. It's okay. So now we have what we want to say, and we may have even written it. Now, how would we structure it so it's easy for skimmers? The reality is people are skimming, and the really radical take of this entire approach is, imagine if it was always the writer's fault if the reader didn't read what they were sent. Right? Imagine if it was, you now are on alert. Your readers are skimming and they're busy and they don't care as much as you do. Yeah. Okay. So imagine if it was always your fault if the reader didn't read it. I often begin classes where I will have a little cartoon of a kind of indignant looking cartoon character with a little, word box above saying, "Didn't you read the thing?" with 4 question marks, where the person is frustrated and I ask, have you ever had this experience where you looked at somebody with contempt, but you tried to fight it? And you're just saying to yourself, wait, didn't you read the thing I sent you? Like, how could you be asking that question? I already sent you the thing. You already know this. But imagine if it was always our fault if they didn't read the thing.
I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I've not heard people say it with writing, but I've heard it with design.
Yes.
So have you heard of this concept of like a Norman door? I love it because I often catch myself, pushing on a door which has pulling on a door which has a handle, and it turns out it's a push door. And I always used to think, oh, I'm an idiot, I didn't remember from last time. And then I read about Don Norman, where he said, yeah, if a design ever leads to the user inappropriately dealing with the instrument, then it's the designer's fault. So we can take that kind of idea and apply it on writing as well. Shift the onus of responsibility.
Exactly. I mean, we like, that's exactly Don Norman. It's always the designer's fault. It's never the user's fault. I just want us to wrap our heads around. Like, of course, we can have reasonable expectations that some people will read some things, but I just like the radical take is imagine if it was always the writer's fault. Okay, so the second one is design for navigation. And what that means is, look, if you know they're going to skim, make it easy for them. Add structure. So there's headings. Put the bottom line up front if you can. Give them, put relevant similar related information next to each other instead of making them. The idea is you don't even above and beyond the writing, we can still structure our writing so that it's easy for skimmers. And some of the eye tracking research sort of shows that people just jump around from heading to heading. And then they go backwards now that they've oriented on the document to figure out what part they want to jump into. And we do these A/B tests where when you add the headings is just one of the components of how you would design for navigation. But even just adding headings, we've done these big randomized experiments of 50,000 people where when you add headings to the different sections, you more than double people's likelihood of getting to them. And so the idea is for the second one is design for navigation because everyone is skimming. And the big philosophical one is imagine it's always our fault.
What would you say? What's the metric that you use to work out whether the subheadings have been successful? Did you say comprehension or?
It depends on the experiment, but for the one I was describing,
Yeah.
it was we were working with a network of journalists that has 50,000 journalists, and they're trying to get journalists to use scholarship in their reporting. And so they write each week they write a little like summary of relevant scholarship, and then they send a newsletter out to 50,000 journalists saying, "Hey, click on these to like learn more about how climate change is contributing to wildfires or how gun restriction laws change gun sales." And then we look at what percent of journalists actually go to and use the resource.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that case, it's clicking. In other cases, we will use like donations, or we'll use comprehension, or we'll use filling out a survey, or we'll use responding, or we'll use showing up to something.
Yeah, and whatever metric you tend to use, you're still finding this directionally similar result of adding the subheadings, improve donations, comprehension, or clicks. Yeah.
Right. I mean, headings is one
Mm.
sub insight, and
Yeah.
and we don't. I mean, all the examples I was just describing, all the outcome measures I was just describing, some are relevant to headings, some are relevant to other forms of the insights. Can I tell what I think people often find to be the funniest experiment?
Oh, please, yeah, absolutely.
Which is I work with in the United States there are two dominant political parties, and I occasionally work with one of them, and one of them calls me up, and it's a live phone call, and they're like, "Hey, we're about to send an email out to our 700,000 donors. Can you look at it and recommend what randomized experiment which we should test?" And this is like a live call, so I don't actually have time to like actually edit. And so what I propose is, well, it's kind of long. What if you randomly delete every other paragraph? So just arbitrarily delete every other paragraph, so it's incoherent. And we actually have readers read both, and they agree that the one with the arbitrarily deleted paragraphs is incoherent. And then they run the experiment and increase donation by 16% in dollars by just cutting it in half. Because if you've ever received any of these sort of long, convoluted, nuanced messages, like you're either on the team right now and want to act or not really contingent on how compelling the third paragraph was.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fascinating study because it's almost kind of stacking the odds against your hypothesis. Even the worst editing on a long, windy email will improve responses. Fantastic.
Yeah.
I did like your other point about one of the early ones around replacing unnecessary complex words with simpler ones. I think one of my favorite ever papers, just because of the name as much as anything else, is the Oppenheimer paper, Consequences of Erudite Vernacular, Utilize Irrespective of Necessity, Dangers of Using Long Words Needlessly. And it's a brilliant study because he gives people an abstract for an academic article, and they read the original one with its verbose overuse of jargon, and they rate the intelligence of the author. And then he gives another version where he's taken out those complex words and replaced them with simple alternatives. And the key find is he finds that that second group rate the author as 13% more intelligent. And that's one of the findings that I think really clashes with people's expectations, that especially B2B professionals, they're working in a really important area. They think they have to behave in a very formal manner. So they stuff their writing with complex words, yet it backfires on the very metric they're trying to boost. Was that one of the, if you worked on areas like that, we've seen similar findings?
Yeah, I mean, one of our principles is make reading easy. And what that means is lower the reading level, the grade level reading. There are all these measures, but Flesch Kincaid is a measure that puts it at the grade level that we teach. And so the 50th percentile of US adults, the median US adult, reads at a 9th grade reading level. And so
Now,
when we
ninth
write,
grade, because so apologies to anyone who's American, they'll probably know what that means. In Britain, what age would that be? Would that be 14?
Exactly.
14,
yeah. That was like exactly the perspective taking error that you would, which we were talking about earlier, which is, wait, everyone doesn't know exactly what I know. Yeah, sorry. So 14-year-olds. The idea is we and others have done a ton of research on that. When we write with unfamiliar long words, or when we write in sentences that are grammatically complicated but still grammatically correct, one, it deters people who can read it if they just don't want to exert the effort to read it. And two, it's inaccessible to a very large fraction of people. We have a paper that came out this week, me and two other co-authors, Hillary Schulman and Dave Markowitz, where we look at 30,000 randomized experiments with the Washington Post, looking at the headlines. So basically, they'll write stories, and then they'll write multiple headlines. And then they'll do these A/B tests to see which headline people read the most. And then we can look across all the headlines and see what are the attributes of headlines that people are more likely to read. And consistent with everything that we're talking about, we find that the simpler the headline, the more common the words, the shorter the words, the more likely people are to read it. And what we find in a bunch of follow-up studies is that people appear to just skip over headlines that have any complexity at all. They're just like, look, I'll just jump to the next one. And they don't even read it, and they have no memory of ever encountering it. This is for Washington Post readers who, for those of you in the UK, this is typically a college educated readership. We also borrow we do the same experiments with a more normal news source called Upworthy that has a less elitely educated readership. Same exact pattern, which is the more you use unfamiliar, uncommon words, the more likely people are to just skip over it and not click on them.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I think many people might think, well, if I am on a governmental campaign and I need to reach the whole swathes of population, then the accessibility bit is crucial to use simple words. But they might think to themselves, well, I'm communicating to a very affluent, very well-educated audience. They know these $50 words. Why do I have to, in their, the criticism might be to dumb down. But I think from your angle, you're saying, well, even if people have the capability, even if they've got postgraduate English qualifications, when they are busy, when they are tired, they don't want to use those capabilities.
You got it.
Is that fair?
That's exactly it. The idea, and I think you did a nice job of isolating out the kind of the less obvious part. The obvious part is if you write in a way that's inaccessible, then people who don't understand those words are not going to read it. Okay, so it's exclusionary and you're limiting your potential readership. The sort of step past that is even those who know those words and can read like that are still also going to skip over it, because we're all trying to reduce our cognitive effort. And especially when there's lots of other things we could read, we just skip over the hard ones. And I actually encourage everyone to watch the way you read, and you'll see that it's just like, next.
Yeah. And do you recommend any like software for people if they've written an email and they're going to send it out? In the past, I've used things like Hemingway, where you can cut and paste the text and it will give you a a US reading grade. Are there any software that you think work particularly well to help people reduce the complexity of their writing?
That was a total softball. We did not talk about this in advance,
No,
Richard.
definitely.
So, so what a computer science colleague here at Harvard and I,
Yeah.
a few months ago, trained GPT-4, which, at the time of it being developed was the most sophisticated. Now GPT-4o is the most sophisticated. But we train ChatGPT's underlying large language model on the checklist, which is a one-page checklist of the principles. And then we tuned it for a bunch of pre-post messages where we had the original for email. This is just for email. The original, and then improved so it was skimmable. And then we put it out. It's now, in a few months, 150,000 users. It's very popular. It's at writingforbusyreaders.com. It's at our website. It's free. But I think of it as a coach. And we're trying to get the other LLMs to adopt it, to just internalize it, because they are trained. LLM means large language model, the AI tools, but they're trained on writing as we write. And that is kind of inductive. And what we're saying is, it turns out that we should be writing a little differently to make it skimmable. And so it's kind of a deductive process. This is a massive oversimplification of the way these models work. And so we're saying you should actually just follow these rules and make it a lot easier to read. And so it's at our website, writingforbusyreaders.com. Hemingway is cool. It really focuses on grade level reading. And that's one of the important insights. But it's also we need to structure our writing. So it's skimmable, and that is not just grade level. That is also writing so it's easy to navigate, and using fewer words overall, and using formatting to reinforce the purpose and the rest of the principles.
Yeah.
And we'll put it in the show notes. We'll put
definitely. So we'll put links to your book, Writing for Busy Readers, and then all the things you've been mentioning. But definitely,
can I undermine the book sales by saying we'll also put the one pager on the on the thing. We were aware that of the irony of writing a 200-page book where one of the principles is write fewer words, and so there's also a checklist that I think is also good for just practical uses. But if you really want to understand what the nuance of what we're saying and the science of it, that's what the book fleshes out. But I say use the coaching tool, the AI coaching tool, and use the checklist. And the big mission is we want everyone to add a round of editing to everything they write, everything, where we just ask ourselves, step back and just ask ourselves, how do I make it easier for the readers?
When you were writing the book, when you were researching it, what was the most surprising finding that you mentioned? Because I think a lot of your work will have prepared you for the findings in the book. What took you for surprise?
I love that question, because there is one in particular, and Jessica was less surprised than I was by this, but I love the eye tracking research where most of the time people aren't even bothering to engage with what we write, but if they do, conditional on engaging, they'll sort of lock your face in and then track your eyes as you're reading across the screen. And there's this thing called the period pause effect, which is when people encounter a period, they sit there. They go basically word, 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 period. And then they just sit there. And then what appears to be happening is they're synthesizing the sentence. Do I get it? If yes, move forward. If not, go back and reread. And what ends up happening when the sentences are longer and more complex, you have to sit longer and often regress, go back and reread. And that's the cognitive effort that makes people quit on us. And so when we say make reading easy, one of the sort of ways of summarizing the heuristic to think about is people should be able to read going through it once without ever having to go backwards. And it turns out that we can be grammatically correct, but require people to go back and figure out, now that I know how the sentence ends, I got to go reread the sentence to make sense of it. And maybe that's helpful for postmodern theory. I just think for practical writing, I don't just think, we have evidence that for practical writing, it's counterproductive.
Yeah. Well, that's a brilliant rule. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Todd. I mean, that's been absolutely fascinating. And it is a book I found super useful. So I would certainly strongly recommend it. What we like to do at the end of each episode is finish on a final question. And it's just really to ask, what are you reading at the moment? It might not be about behavioral science. It might be outside of the field. What are you reading or watching that you would recommend to the listeners?
I'm going to name two things, two
Okay.
books.
Yeah.
The first book is because my daughter in ninth grade in the United States, which again, we agreed is 14-year-old, is reading called Lord of the Flies. I'm
Oh,
rereading
wow.
that.
Yeah.
And I did not remember it at all. And I'm rereading it so that we can talk about it.
I think
Turns
I
out
read
that,
it about that age as well with school, remembering very little apart from Piggy being a character. But yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
man, they are not nice to that kid. They
They
are
are not. I
not
think
nice.
that's the TLDR.
Yeah, the TLDR is those boys were not nice to Piggy.
Yeah.
The second one is a book that someone recommended to me, where that I had already purchased and I had forgotten that I had. And what happens is, so since writing the book, I go around training organizations and governments all the time on how to write for busy readers, often online, sometimes in person. It's just like the mission is we want to write so we want everyone to add a round of editing. So they ask themselves, how do I make it easier for the reader? Because when I make it easier for the reader, it's more effective, it's kinder, and it's actually more accessible. Uh, and so one thing I've become kind of obsessed with is signage, like signs. And it's been so fun sharing this work. And I was in Dubai for doing giving a talk workshop on this work. And I took a public train in Dubai, and I don't read Arabic. And so I couldn't understand the Arabic. There was a lot of English words next to it, which is nice. It's accessible, but I also didn't read that. But then right next to it was an incredible image that was just completely clear. I was supposed to stand to the sides while people came in and out. And it was like super obvious. The signage, I didn't read Arabic because I don't understand it. I didn't read English because I don't read it. and the signage. So I become obsessed with signage. And I asked, I have a newsletter for people who are into this topic with me. I encourage people to sign up if you're interested. And I asked the members of the newsletter, I'm like, hey, what book should I read about signage? And the book is 99% Invisible City. And it is just little chapters, 1 to 4 pages of just interesting things about the way cities are designed to reinforce and change behavior, sometimes for the better, often for the worse, but just these little hidden things that are hidden in the design of cities. And if people are listening and have an additional recommendation on signage, I just think signs are incredible. What better way to communicate to busy readers than to not use any words at all?
Yeah, so I agree with that. The one that I was thinking of is you talk about the Dubai example and the power of pictures was, I think it was a Dutch airport. I must have stumbled across this on Twitter, and they recognised that when people park their car in the multi-story car park, if you are on, row Z, floor 6, when you come back a week later, how are you going to remember that? Because people are awful at remembering abstractions. There's some brilliant work from people like Ian Begg that we can understand an abstraction, but 2 minutes later, forgotten it. And he showed that we're much better at remembering concrete, visualizable things. So what the airport had done was, rather than have floor 1, it was the giraffe floor. Floor 2 was the elephant floor. Floor 3 was the lion floor. And I thought that was such a simple solution in retrospect, but going back to some of the themes that you've been discussing, it really would have required someone to step out of their knowledgeable shoes, as a professional working in that car park, and adopt the mindset of being, like me, a holiday maker, completely ignorant, turning up for the first time. So I think that's a lovely recommendation. Did you say it was 99% visible, the name?
99% Invisible City.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, well, we'll definitely stick that in the show notes. Well, that was been brilliant.
Yeah, I love what you said about the airport. That's cool because it you might think that once we've given you the floor number and the floor letter, it's on you to remember. And of course, that's true. But what if we owned that it was our job to help them remember?
Yeah, I like that. I think that is a theme again from the chat we've had. If you take that sense of responsibility, then an awful lot of the ideas of shorter words, fewer ideas, shorter sentences, less abstract thinking. All of those things people I think can easily deliver if they feel they've got that onus of responsibility. So that's a lovely way to end it. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Todd. Fantastic chatting to you.
Yeah, you too, Richard. Thank you.
And to everyone that's listening, please click on the subscribe button and hopefully speak again next week.
Behavioral Science for Brands is brought to you by Method One. Method One is a team of modern marketers that practices the art and science of behavior change to fuel growth for indulgence brands. We do this by building interconnected marketing ecosystems that place the human experience at the center of brand building strategies across owned, earned, and paid media. To learn how to leverage behavioral science in your marketing or advertising, visit us at www.methodone.com.